The cafe hummed with the quiet clatter of cups and the low murmur of conversations outside the windows, where sunlight streamed through the glass. Casting warm patterns on the floor, Maria sat in her wheelchair near the corner, her hands gripping, the arms tightly, her eyes scanning the room for someone who might notice her. She had been here for hours. No one had spoken to her. No one had offered help, and the suspense built as she wondered if anyone ever would. The smell of coffee and pastries filled the air, yet it offered no comfort, only a reminder of the normal life she had once taken for granted. Her legs had betrayed her years ago in an accident that left her paralyzed from the waist down, and though she had learned to navigate the world on wheels, there were moments like this when the loneliness pressed in like a storm. No one noticing the human trapped in stillness, and the suspense thickened because every face that passed ignored her completely. A mother with a stroller crossed. Near the counter, her child laughing and tugging at the toys dangling from the bar. But they didn't look at Maria. They didn't slow. Their world was moving too fast, and she felt invisible again. Her fingers tapped nervously on the wheels of her chair, her heart beating faster with every passing second, the suspense mounting, because she wondered if the next person would notice her at all. The door swung open with a gust of wind, and in walked a man tall and confident, dressed in a suit that gleamed slightly under the cafe lights. His presence turned a few heads, not because he demanded it, but because he carried himself with a quiet authority. Maria felt her chest tighten for reasons she couldn't explain at first, as he held the hand of a little girl who looked no older than 6, her eyes wide with curiosity, the suspense building because she had no idea why she was suddenly paying attention. The little girl's eyes scanned the room while holding her father's hand. She spotted Maria immediately and pointed excitedly, tugging at her father's sleeve. He followed her gaze and paused. The man's eyes softened as they landed on Maria. He didn't rush or hesitate. He simply walked toward her with calm steps, and the suspense heightened because Maria didn't understand why anyone would approach her, let alone a stranger who seemed so important. He stopped in front of her chair, crouching slightly to meet her at eye level. The little girl giggled nervously but stayed close. To him, Maria felt her own nervousness spike. She had learned to expect pity or avoidance, but never genuine attention from someone like this. The man's voice was gentle, yet deliberate, as he said hello and asked if she was all right, the suspense thickening because she didn't know how to respond without revealing her vulnerability. Maria hesitated for a long moment, unsure if this was a dream or reality. Her lips pressed together as she finally whispered that she was fine. Her hands flexed around the chair arms as if preparing to retreat. Yet the little girl reached forward, offering a small paper flower she had made earlier, and the suspense built because no one had ever offered her something so pure and innocent. The man smiled softly at the gesture, taking the girl's hand in his, and then his gaze returned to Maria. He asked her name politely. She gave it quietly, barely audible over the cafe noise. His eyes seemed to recognize something deeper beyond her words, as if he saw a strength that the rest of the world had overlooked, the suspense stretching, because Maria felt a strange sense of connection she hadn't experienced in years. He introduced himself simply and mentioned that he noticed she had been alone for some time. The words were casual, yet filled with meaning. Maria's heart began to beat faster as she realized she wasn't invisible, at least not to him. The little girl shifted slightly, tugging gently at his sleeve as if encouraging him to stay, the suspense intensifying because Maria wasn't sure what this encounter might lead to. The man asked if she would like some company, and Maria felt a mix of fear and hope swirling inside her. She nodded slowly, and the little girl clapped her hands, softly, with delight. The cafe seemed to change around them, the other patrons becoming a blur as the focus tightened on this small interaction, the suspense lingering. because Maria wondered if kindness like this existed in her world anymore. He gestured toward the empty seat across from her chair, inviting her to relax. The little girl sat beside him and offered her a cookie. Maria's fingers twitched nervously as she accepted it, the warmth of the gesture spreading through her chest, the suspense remaining because the simple act felt like the start of something she hadn't dared to hope for. As they talked quietly, he asked about her day, her routines, her life before the accident. Her voice grew steadier as she spoke, the words flowing more freely than they had in years. She noticed the way he listened intently, never judging or pitying, and the suspense heightened because she realized she hadn't felt seen like this in a very long time. The little girl laughed at something Maria said, and Maria felt a lightness in her chest she hadn't experienced since before her accident. She smiled, and for the first time, she felt part of a conversation rather than an outsider looking in. The man watched silently, yet attentively, allowing the moment to unfold naturally, the suspense lingering. Because Maria sensed he understood her more than she could say. Suddenly, a gust of wind blew through the cafe door, rattling the chairs and bringing the aroma of rain. Maria glanced outside and saw dark clouds gathering. The moment felt symbolic somehow. Her hands gripped her chair tighter, not from fear but anticipation. The man noticed her gaze and gently nodded as if assuring her that she wasn't alone. The suspense building because neither of them knew what the next few minutes might bring. The little girl leaned closer, whispering a secret about how she loved visiting cafes and meeting new people. Maria chuckled softly and felt warmth spread through her shoulders. The man smiled at the exchange, and then quietly asked if Maria had someone she relied on or if she lived alone. The question felt invasive, yet carrying the suspense mounting because Maria hadn't shared her solitude with anyone in years. She hesitated and then admitted that most days she was alone. The man's expression softened further. He offered nothing but understanding. The little girl squeezed his hand and smiled up at Maria as if bridging the silence, the suspense building, because Maria felt something unfamiliar yet comforting, a sense of acceptance she hadn't felt in a long time. The conversation continued as the storm outside began to grow louder, the wind rattling windows and the first drops of rain hitting the pavement beyond. The little girl pressed her face to the glass, fascinated by the raindrops. Maria watched her and felt a strange warmth in her chest, as though the universe had conspired to bring this moment together, the suspense lingering because the storm outside mirrored the emotional storm inside her. At one point, the man offered to order another round of drinks for them, and Maria found herself laughing at his humor, a sound she had almost forgotten she could make. The little girl giggled and clapped, and the small cafe seemed to shrink around them, creating a bubble of unexpected connection. The suspense building because Maria knew that this chance encounter could change everything. As the rain intensified, the man glanced at his watch and realized he had been there much longer than expected. He suggested a walk under the covered awning outside. The little girl eagerly agreed. Maria hesitated briefly, but then nodded. The suspense heightened because stepping outside felt like stepping into an unknown future where she might finally be seen and appreciated. The three of them moved toward the door, carefully maneuvering Maria's wheelchair through the narrow aisles. The cafe patrons watched quietly, sensing the significance of the moment. The man pushed her gently while the little girl skipped ahead, occasionally turning to point out puddles or raindrops on the glass, the suspense remaining because Maria felt a thrill of uncertainty she hadn't felt in years. Once outside, the rain fell in steady sheets. The man guided her under the awning, keeping her dry while the little girl danced near the edge, giggling with delight. Maria's chest tightened with emotion she hadn't expected, and the suspense grew because she realized she was no longer invisible in a world that had once ignored her. The man smiled down at her and quietly said that sometimes life brought people together in unexpected ways. Maria nodded her head slowly, the little girl tugging gently at his sleeve, whispering something Maria couldn't quite hear. The suspense lingered because she felt that this encounter was only the beginning of something far greater than a simple act of kindness. They paused as a car drove by, splashing water on the street. The little girl squealed, and Maria laughed softly for the first time in what felt like an eternity. The man offered her hand for balance. She didn't take it yet. The gesture spoke volumes, and the suspense heightened because Maria sensed that trust was slowly forming between them. Finally, they stopped under the corner of the building, protected from the rain. Maria took a deep breath, looking at both of them. The man asked if she would like to meet again sometime. Her heart beat faster and she nodded. The little girl clapped her hands gleefully, the suspense building, because in that moment, Maria felt a hope she had thought was lost forever.